Hello viewer, in the first part of the video on classroom communication, you have learned about the concept of communication and the process of classroom communication. In this part, I am going to deal with the factors affecting the classroom communication and then the principles of effective classroom communication. In the last video, you have seen that the classroom communication is determined by a multiplicity of factors, including the teacher related factor, the student related factor, the message related factor, and instructional methods and media related factor, as well as the learning environment that is created in the class. When I say teacher related factors, a number of factors come into play. One of the teacher related factors is the life position from which a teacher operates in the classroom situation. You can see on the slide that each one of us has perception about oneself and perception about others. A teacher can operate from four different quadrants, that is, I am not okay, you are okay, I am not okay, you are not okay, and I am okay, you are not okay, or a person can operate from I am okay, you are okay. I am okay, you are okay is the life position which is the best to operate and communicate to the people. And if you start operating from I am okay, you are okay, you give due respect and recognition to the other individual. And this happens in the classroom, then there is an environment where free flow of information will be there from both sides, and teacher would like to encourage students to participate in the classroom activities and who would also like to provide and obtain feedback from the students. Thus, communication will be very effective when the teacher operates from I am okay, you are okay life position. Another factor which can affect the communication is the self concept which is possessed by the teacher himself. Whether he has the realistic self concept or the unrealistic self concept. The principle of effective communication is that you try to communicate by taking a very realistic self concept about yourself. That is, you have a correct estimate of your strengths and weaknesses and you try to communicate to others. Perception about world. If you have correct perception about the world, that means you think this world is worth living, then your motivation to do something would be very high. And when you go to the class, you will be very, very positive in your approach and would communicate positive things to your students and thus motivate them. Proficiency in the subject matter is of utmost importance. A teacher who has adequate knowledge about the content which he is going to deal with can elaborate on the subject, can build connections between the subject and other subjects, can build the connection between the subject and the other disciplines, can exemplify the subject matter, will be able to clarify the doubts of the students, can go deeper into the content matter and relate it to day-to-day life and the world of work. So, subject matter knowledge is very important for the teacher. And if the teacher doesn't have adequate subject matter knowledge, then it is going to adversely affect the classroom communication and maybe you are not able to satisfy your students with respect to the topic or the subject which you are teaching to them. Knowledge of pedagogy or andragogy, or in other words, the pedagogical content knowledge must be possessed by the teacher, because this is a factor which is going to affect the communication in the classroom. A teacher who has the subject matter knowledge but doesn't have the knowledge of the method and media which can be utilized to provide or deliver or transfer that content to the students in an appropriate manner will fail in achieving the learning outcomes. There is a vast body of research which is available which tells you about which particular method or media will be more appropriate and relevant in dealing with concepts, in dealing with principles, or dealing with the problem solving. So, a teacher, if he is teaching mechanical engineering or civil engineering or electronics and communication engineering, need to know which are the approaches which can be best utilized to transfer the message to the students. So, knowledge of pedagogy, when we are dealing with students who are not adults, or when we are trying to deal with the adults, the knowledge of andragogy is must. Or the teacher needs to develop the pedagogical content knowledge in the subject matter. So it is very, very specific. The method which may be very appropriate for civil engineering may not be appropriate for computer science and engineering. So pedagogical content knowledge is what needs to be possessed by the teacher, and if that is lacking, then it may adversely affect the classroom communication process. Understanding of learners is another important factor which is related to the teacher. The teacher needs to have adequate assessment of the abilities and traits or the previous knowledge which a student brings to the classroom situation. And if we try to examine the 21st century learners, it is very evident from the research which has been done in the area that students of 21st century are not able to concentrate for a long period of time. They are primarily the visual learners, they are multitaskers, they are tech savvy and would like to access the technology and depend upon technology. They are the people who prefer group work rather than the independent work. They are very, very social as far as the 21st century students are concerned. Now, if the students who are joining the classroom and teacher tries to take the assessment of all the variables like physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and psychological variables of the students and try to select methods and media which are appropriate to the level of the learners, then the teacher will be able to pitch the lesson to the level of the learners or pitch the message to the level of learners, and thus communication would be more effective. In addition to the above, a teacher needs to possess both verbal and non-verbal communication skills. And it has been very rightly remarked that people speak with the vocal organs but communicate with the whole body. It is not only the words which are paid attention to by the students in the classroom, but the whole personality of the teacher comes into play when the teacher is interacting with the students in the classroom situation. And thus, it is very important that the teacher pays attention to the verbal symbols which he is utilizing in the class, though they have effect on the effectiveness of communication only up to 7%. The tonal quality of the teacher determines the effectiveness of communication to the extent of 38%. So, what is being said and how it is being said are the two important elements in the communication process. The teacher needs to pay attention to what tonal quality he is or she is utilizing in the class. Now, for example, when I am in the class, I want my students who have entered the class to take the seat. The very simple thing which I say, please sit down. Another way of saying the same is, please sit down. Now, these two tonal qualities will have entirely a different effect on the student. Thus, you must watch what you say, how you say it. And the third important parameter in determining the effectiveness of communication is the non-verbal behavior, which has an effect on the effectiveness up to 55%. And here you can see when I am talking about the non-verbal behavior, it encompasses number of things. It includes your facial expression, your eye contact, your gestures, your body movement in the classroom situation. And let's little bit go into detail of the verbal communication in the classroom. Here, three things which are very important is the language which is used by the teacher. The teacher needs to use a language which is comprehensible to the learner. It may be English if the students are able to understand. It may be a combination of Hindi English or Punjabi English or a mix of the local language with the English, because the primary role of teacher is to make the students comprehend or understand the material rather than the language. And whatever language is being used, it has to be technically and grammatically correct. So one needs to ensure that the verbal component is appropriate as per the level of the students. And when it comes to nonverbal communication, you can classify the nonverbal behavior into five major categories. One is kinesics, that is the facial expression, the gestures, the body posture, and the eye contact. And then the paralanguage, which consists of the tone, the volume, the pitch, the rhythm, the articulation, and pronunciation of the teacher himself. And artifacts refers to the dress, the clothes, the jewelry, the other accessories which you carry to the classroom situation. Then chronemics. Chronemics refer to the time dimension, at what time of the day you are trying to communicate to your students. Then proxemics refers to the spatial dimension, how much distance you maintain from your students. Thus, a teacher needs to pay attention to all these five different categories of nonverbal behavior and remain proficient in communication skills. And all those four basic skills of speaking, reading, writing, and listening, they need to be possessed by the teacher if he wants to effectively communicate to the students. In addition to that, a teacher needs to be very, very flexible in his approach. Now, for example, you planned for a group discussion to be organized. You asked your students to prepare the topic and participate in the group discussion. When you start organizing the group discussion, you find that students have not actually read and comprehended the material. The teacher needs to be flexible in the approach that if he finds it is going to be a futile exercise, then he can switch over to another method of instruction and utilize the time which is available in achieving the learning outcomes. Or say, for example, you have given an example from the field, but the students are unable to comprehend. You should be flexible enough to switch over to an example from day to day life. Or if the students say that they are not able to understand what is given in the video film, maybe you are versatile enough to explain that process and phenomena yourself in the classroom. That is flexibility in approach. The teacher, in addition to that, need to be free from biases and prejudices. When I say biases and prejudices, there should not be any bias on the basis of caste, creed, color, gender, etc. You should be able to leave these biases outside the class and treat each and every student in the classroom on the same footing. And you should be able to respect each and every student and recognize the effort of each and every student in the class. This will provide an environment where students will feel motivated to participate in the classroom activities and would be participating in discussions and clarifying doubts and raising questions in the class. There are certain factors which relate to the message itself. If the message itself is not designed properly, it is going to adversely affect the process of communication in the classroom. So, the very first thing which should be specified are the learning outcomes. A teacher must clearly specify what is expected of the learner at the end of unit of instruction. What a student is able to do at the end of unit of instruction. If that is clear, then the selection of content becomes easy and you are able to arouse the necessary motivation level among your students to learn that material. Relevance to the learning outcome. So, whatever content is selected by the teacher, it should be directly related to the learning outcome. So, there should be content which facilitate the attainment of learning outcome. So, if you include irrelevant material which you are going to deliver in the class, the message, then it will not serve the purpose and the communication will become ineffective. Another point which is to be taken into consideration by the teacher is that the message should have up to date content. It must be current. It must be relevant to the context. If I am going to deal with, say, the media, and I start dealing with the blackboard and start explaining how to organize, now that may appear to be irrelevant. Today, when we are talking about the media, maybe we have to focus more upon the digital content rather than on the blackboard or the green board, etc. Or when you are dealing with the technology, it has to be what is existing in the industry rather than the 10 years or 20 years old technology as is being used in some of the technical institutions or technical programs. Sequencing of content matter needs to be ensured, and while content is selected, the teacher must ensure that he or she moves from simple to complex, from easy to difficult, from concrete to abstract, and he or she tries to organize the content matter in order to facilitate or optimize learning among the student. For example, if you are starting with teaching a principle, and let me take that you talk about the voltage is directly proportional to current. Now, here when I say this principle, there are two basic concepts which are involved, the voltage and the current. That means the learning of principle will be facilitated when the students have very clear understanding of the basic concept of voltage and current, and in addition they understand the concept of proportionality. Or if I am dealing with first order, second order, higher order differential equations, then the sequencing of content is that I first teach first order differential equation, go to the second order, and then go to the higher order. Now there is a logical sequencing of the content matter. Or I am dealing with a machine, then I first deal with the machine, the various parts of the machine, explain the function of various parts of the machine, and then I go to the operation or the working of that particular machine. There is a logical sequencing of the, so both logical and psychological sequencing of the content matter has to be ensured by the teacher. Another is there need not be information underload or overload. When you have information underload, that means you are not providing adequate information related to the message, or you are not able to explain the message in detail that students are able to understand that. So underload of information is leading to wastage of time, and maybe you are not able to achieve the learning outcomes to the maximum. Overload of information can also lead to a situation where the students are confused and are not able to understand, are not able to exactly get what they should know. So both underload and overload needs to be avoided, and whatever information is included in the message, that should be adequate and appropriate to the learning outcomes and as per the breadth and scope of the subject or the topic in the syllabus. You can also go beyond the syllabus if you are going to deal with certain current things which are not enlisted in the syllabus. Another important parameter which you need to take into account while designing a message is the use of symbols. Make use of symbols, both verbal and non-verbal, which are technically correct. So that will ensure that the message achieves its purpose. In addition to that, the language which you use for the message designing should be at the level of the learner, which the learner is able to comprehend. The message may consist of tasks, exercises also, and you must ensure as a teacher that you are able to provide adequate practice to your students with respect to, say, you are dealing with derivations, you are dealing with problem solving activity, then the students require a lot of practice to have mastery over those things. So make sure that the exercises, tasks which you include are relevant to the content, and you give them opportunity to apply the learned concepts and principles. Once you engage your students in problem solving, you are actually trying to give them the opportunity to apply the learned knowledge. When you give examples or you exemplify the content matter, you enable your learners to generalize the application of the learned knowledge and skills. So, adequate use of examples and non-examples must be ensured in the message. Now, when I say non-examples, it refers to where this particular concept or rule is not applicable. Which is an example of equilateral triangle, and if I against equilateral triangle I have another figure which shows a right angle triangle, then right angle triangle is not an example of equilateral triangle. So make use of examples and non-examples to ensure generalizability on the part of the learners.